Hello, everybody. This is Kim Andrews,
And Molly Wade.
and this is Swimming in the Deep End for deep healing and peace.
We are here to have courageous conversations about our journeys so that we can all create lives overflowing with freedom and joy. And welcome back. We are glad you're here. This episode, we are talking about this, the big word, forgiveness. And I actually recently had someone bring this topic up again based on listening to episodes 3 and 4, part 1 and 2 of my story. If you haven't heard it yet, go listen, push pause, go back, go listen to them. And about my story, asking not if, but how I came to forgive and what did that process look like? And did I have anger and resentment and was I holding on to those things against the people from my past? And the answer was no at the beginning. And so we'll kind of dig into that a little bit. So for me, just personal story sharing time. When all of the stuff that was happening, all the traumatic events, I took them personally, meaning I took on the guilt, the shame, the consequences, the responsibility, the ownership, however you want to label that. And by doing that, there was nothing to be angry about because I wasn't acknowledging that they hurt me. I was acknowledging I was hurt, which is very much different than acknowledging who or what hurt you or caused the hurt. And so I was at a place of hurt and pain because I had rationalized it in my mind that because of something I said and or did was what had caused the pain in the first place. So the only one to blame was myself. So there wasn't, for me in my thought process, there wasn't anything to forgive. There wasn't anything to let go of because I was holding it in and it was my problem, my issue to start with. And it wasn't until later on that I could start acknowledging and accepting that those actions that were taken against me was not because of something I said or did. It was because of those choices of somebody else that were not in my control. That was their free choice to do as they wanted to do. And so there was some anger that came up with that. And it was never a revengeful, spiteful, I gotta go pay him back and make him pay and anything like that. And I really believe that's because at that point in my life, when that realization kind of hit, I had already done so much personal work and I could recognize that holding on to anger and unforgiveness wasn't going to benefit me. It doesn't mean it wasn't there. I chose not to keep it around for a long time because it wasn't beneficial. And so it was a great question that this person had asked. And how do we forgive? And, are you taking responsibility for somebody else's actions? Are you taking on that guilt? Are you able to appropriately place the guilt and the responsibility on the person and then work through that forgiveness? Because hanging on to unforgiveness is just as destructive as hanging on to responsibility and shame that is not yours.
So, as I'm listening to you, I know you're saying that in the beginning you weren't angry at anyone else. However, you did had anger, and so that was directed towards yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And were you aware of that in the beginning?
No.
And so how did our anger always manifest as something?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think it manifested in your life?
I think a lot of different ways, mostly unhealthy because I didn't know and recognize what that internal anger was at the time. And really, under anger is fear and pain and things. It came out in the form of just being very disconnected from people and putting a wall up, very shut off, and being overly protective of myself. Sarcasm was a very good thing, and still is, a way to get my anger out without feeling that I was angry, right? Quote unquote angry. But my sarcasm obviously definitely had that tint of anger in it. And it was a way that I could passive aggressively be angry without feeling rude or disrespectful. Yet really my sarcasm was quite rude and quite disrespectful at times. So I masked my anger a lot with short, snappy sarcasm. So it was never a, raging anger, but a very short and I just shut people off really quick. I wouldn't give them a chance. And I think a lot of that had to do with some of the anger, manifesting in different ways like that.
So you were self-soothing and self-medicating in ways that were not.
Yep, that too. Drugs and alcohol definitely, I think, was a way to push down the anger that I did have, even if the anger wasn't directed at everybody, and more of it was directed towards myself. In another way, with shutting down, I think the anger that was underneath everything, I also categorized people. And so, well, if you look like this and talk like that, I'm going to put you in a group of people I associate with pain, and I'm not even going to talk to you. So, putting people in boxes that they may or may not have, fit in, and just assuming, oh, well, if you're a male and you're hanging out with a certain type of crowd, that automatically just means something. And I did that with church. Another thing, good example. All churches are the same and put them all in this box when that's not true. There was some church hurt and religious hurt, but that didn't mean every single building, every single organization was the one that I experienced. Didn't mean that. And so with my anger, I think that was another way of kind of passive aggressively managing my anger, even though my anger wasn't rage or physical expression of it.
So also now you are very much aware of your body, and one of your goals is to help people work through their trauma in their physical bodies.
Yeah.
So are you aware now how that anger may have manifested in you physically
That's a great question.
before?
Yeah. I think trauma, in my opinion, is trauma can cause certain diseases. Some people are born with diseases, not having that debate, but I really do think stress and things can make us physically ill in many different ways. It doesn't always have to be, the cancer, the scary word. It can be other physical issues. And definitely the trauma and I think undealt with anger, resentment, unforgiveness, bitterness, pain, all of those emotions, those what we deem as negative, affect us and affected me in my muscles. And the more that I started learning about somatic work, and bodies is just one form of movement. It's not the only healing movement, just one of many. Really learning. We all know kind of stress up in our neck, right? Our necks are tight, our shoulders are tense. We can all kind of, put two and two together, like stress. Trauma is the same way. Different parts of my body, different muscle groups, feeling sick, feeling off. Great example is we all get stressed out, and sometimes some of us want to eat too much and some don't want to eat at all. That's our stress response, a physical response. And so anger and all those other feelings we talked about, what would make us think that they wouldn't have similar effects? I didn't realize any of this, by the way, at the time. It's taken years to get to the point to start putting things together. Yeah, he shows up in the. Have you ever experienced unforgiveness or forgiveness?
Both. So, the first thing that comes to mind as you talk about your history is after I was sexually assaulted, and I knew where the perpetrator lived. And I remember once sitting in my car in the parking lot of his apartment
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that I wanted to hurt him as much as he hurt me and more.
Mm-hmm.
And just sitting in the car and stewing, and I never got out of the car. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no plan to do anything specifically.
Felt that in you.
I was just sitting there, just stewing in my anger, looking at the apartment building, and I have no idea how long I sat there. I was there for a while, and really just running through my anger. I don't remember crying. I don't remember saying anything or talking to myself. But at some point, I just realized my anger at him, my wanting to hurt him, wasn't going to help me heal. And that just the act of sitting in my car and stewing like that was only hurting me. He was totally unaware of where I was.
Yeah.
And that I was sitting in his parking lot. I have no idea if he was even home. I don't recall seeing his car, if I even knew. I'm sure I knew what his car looked like at the time. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember any of that. I mean, it was so long ago. So,
Yeah.
but I just realized I was hurting myself. And I thought, I need to let go of this. So in a flash, right then and there, because I knew I was only hurting myself, and he probably didn't give a damn one way or the other, I let it go in that moment, and I drove away, went home, and said, you know what, I'm done. I'm done. I'm just done with him. Because I was continuing to allow him to victimize me
Mm-hmm.
by carrying all of that anger. And I do remember walking away and letting it go
Mm-hmm.
fully. And then after that, it was really just about dealing with my anger with myself for getting myself in a position where I was victimized. And so there was, even though he perpetrated something, by the way I carried myself and got into a compromising position,
Mm-hmm.
I believe was partly responsible. But not totally, because I could have been in that compromising position. He could have been a caring human being and not taken advantage.
Yeah.
But I know, because I know the situation, that I did some things that were not smart and did not protect me 100%. But I was a totally different woman. In fact, I probably was more child than woman. I was a child
Yeah.
masquerading as a woman in the world, trying to
Know a few of
make it
those.
and do my best with the consciousness I had at the time. Bless my heart.
Right.
And I'm not that woman anymore. And so I live differently. I am differently. I think differently. I carry myself differently. I have had a number of what I call come to Jesus talks with
Mm-hmm.
myself, taking myself to the shed about how I will present myself to people and what I will allow and not allow. And I trust my gut 100% now. If I am even remotely uncomfortable around somebody, I will shift either my physical stance
Right.
or walk away from a situation, such as if I'm in an elevator by myself and a man gets on the elevator. If I'm uncomfortable, I will get off
Yeah.
the elevator.
Yeah.
And I don't care what he thinks. I don't care what anybody thinks. I may have just gotten on the elevator, but I will get right back off because I trust my gut.
Yeah.
And I trust my intuition. So, but yeah, the least bit that I am uncomfortable, I pay attention to that. And, I didn't pay attention to those cues before. I didn't. And I knew I was
Right.
in a situation with somebody who was probably not trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I was like I said, in a much different place. So, I had to do all that personal work, and that does change. And people do prey on people who are easy prey.
Mm-hmm.
That's what manipulators do. That's what predators do. So they do it in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
So the weakest animal is the one they go for.
Exactly.
And I'm not a weak animal. I had to work on that. So yeah, a lot of personal forgiveness, a lot of personal growth, a lot of owning who I am and working on who I need to be and who I want to be. And that did take some time. So a lot of that work was my own personal work. But yeah, at some point I knew it was useless to be angry with him. Unless I was going to tell him about it, and I didn't want to see him. It's interesting, the next time I saw him, I was in a toy store during Christmas. And actually, I heard his voice before I saw him. And his voice was very noticeable because he's from a different country and he had an accent. And the circumstances of the sexual assault made his voice very prominent and memorable for me.
Yeah.
Because he was actually behind me and he was talking in my ear. His mouth was by my ear.
Okay.
And so I remembered it. I probably would have remembered his voice more than his face.
Yeah.
So, I heard his voice in the next aisle, and, I felt the hair go up on the back of my neck. And I thought, oh, he's in the store. And yet, I didn't have any anger. I also didn't feel a need to run out of the store. I wasn't afraid. And I think he saw me. I don't know. I don't remember right now if there was any flash when he looked at me that he would recognize me. I really don't think it was an issue for him.
Did he even, we don't know.
He didn't acknowledge me. He didn't speak. I didn't speak to him. I did look at him square in the eye, and he was with a woman, and I actually said a prayer for her.
I was just going to say that. I was right on my brain.
Said a prayer
Did you
for
pray
her.
for her?
And I prayed for him, actually, because I thought, as a perpetrator, whether you're a sociopath or not, somebody needs to feed some goodness into your life.
Yeah.
So that happens to be me, then that is me. And I realized at that point I carried no animosity towards them.
Yeah.
No, I had no anger left in me.
I think that's the big turning point, in my opinion, to be able to forgive and release. And, between, Kim's story and mine, I hope the listeners, you guys out there know that Forgiveness is not easy at all. It is a constant daily choice sometimes to choose to do that. And I think the turning point is when we are able to realize that it's not serving us, the unforgiveness, the resentment, the, you know, animosity that we may be holding on to. And I've talked to a lot of different people with different backgrounds about forgiveness. And, you know, I find that a lot of people are like, well, just, if I just want them to apologize, I could just forgive them if they would apologize. And sometimes things like that work out. And your perpetrator, someone that has done harm to you, is able to come and sincerely apologize. Most of the time, that's not how that works, especially depending on how severe the trauma is. That's usually not something they're capable of doing in their mind. They can't even form remorse because it just not there at that moment.
I don't know that I've ever had anybody say they're sorry or apologize or
Right.
hold themselves accountable for something when I've been, especially when I've been very, very hurt. Now, there are some other hurts that have happened. And there are a couple of people in my life now where we've had discussions, friends that I've had discussions with because there was a disagreement or something like that, and then there was forgiveness, and now we are friends, and we're probably better friends than we were before. But for the deep trauma I've had, none of that ever resulted in an apology, and
it usually doesn't.
Yeah, I think usually it doesn't, and I think for me, and it's one of the things I pay attention to in my peace lifestyle program, and I focus on is that if we're ever going to have any peace ourselves, we have to make peace with the fact that there is no peace with this person.
Right. And can you forgive without them acknowledging the hurt that they've done?
Because it may never ever come.
And I mean, and that can be for a lot of reasons. And something that has come up in discussion with people is some people hurt us and they don't even acknowledge that it was a hurt. So, like your experience, he may have not even seen it as an assault and could care less. And he's gone about his, life and day and, whatever. And he's moved on. And so we have to remember too, the pain and trauma we experience, it's not taking away, it's not it's not lessening it by any means. It's valid, our pain is real, trauma is real, and we have to be able to, like you said, come to that place of accepting that that's what happened, here we are, and being able to acknowledge that that other person may never apologize and may never even acknowledge that there was something wrong to apologize for. And so, how do we validate ourselves and work through the pain and comfort and acknowledge our experiences? So we're not just letting someone off the hook and be like, oh, it's fine, they assaulted me, it's no big deal. No, it is a big deal. That shouldn't have happened. And how can we get past that where we feel validated and in process, so we're not shoving things under the rug or holding in anger, and also acknowledging that they made a poor choice. It affected me greatly, and holding on to anger and resentment and animosity with it is not serving me at all. And they're probably not even aware that I'm angry. Because if they were bold enough to hurt me, I'm pretty sure they're not concerned with my feelings and my anger and the consequences of their actions.
And even if they are, they may not be man or woman enough to come to you and say, gee, I'm sorry, I messed up, and I messed up big, and I made a bad choice, and I know I can't take away the pain that you went through that I caused, but please know that that will never happen again, and I ask your forgiveness.
Right.
Because not everybody's willing to admit they've done something wrong.
Or
Not every.
they're, you know, buried in shame and guilt because they do have a sense of, oh, I messed up. And sometimes we don't get that apology for that reason too. It's not always because they don't acknowledge it. It's sometimes not, like you said, have the ability to even have the strength to come up and say that. So,
And some people, yes, so they're not man or woman enough to, or emotionally mature enough to acknowledge that and then ask for forgiveness. And people may, do it passive aggressively, and then they're overly nice to you for a while,
buying you
and
gifts.
buying you gifts, inviting you out, trying to make small talk, which is always awkward at that point because you're hurting. You may not say anything to them. They know they've hurt you, and they're not going to say
Right.
anything. So the two of you do this dance around each other, and there is no true resolution to the hurt, to whatever has transpired. So now you have an inauthentic relationship, and which is another problem, just a problem on another level.
Right.
And sometimes we just have to be the adult in the room. And especially if it's a friendship or a personal connection or a colleague, somebody's hurt you, sometimes we have to say, because they may not be aware, sometimes we have to say, gee, what you said or did hurt me. And if we're going to go beyond this and continue to have this kind of connection, whatever it is, I'd like an apology. Or do you even, let's talk about this. Do you even know that you did something to hurt me? And have an adult conversation, but we're not always willing to say we've been hurt. And people aren't always willing to say that I know I hurt you and I apologize.
Yeah, and I love how you brought that back too. It doesn't always, forgiveness doesn't always equate to big traumatic events. It can be hurtful words and, actions. And like you said, I think some people, especially if we're kind of in a close relationship and we know them, their actions can be hurtful and they're not aware. I know I've said things unintentionally, not meaning anything by it, and then someone will come up and go, hey, what did you really mean by that? Because I kind of took it this way, and I'm really sorry, that's not what I meant, and I can be mindful of that going forward. And so how can we be bold enough to have those conversations with the people that are in our life when things of that nature happen? Trauma and assault is, much different situation in regards of trying to make amends, if really a healthy idea. But when you're talking with friends and someone has said something, we approach that in those healthy relationships we want to continue, thing. So, good conversation.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is if it is somebody you know and they're in your life, and it is something that could be worked out, it's not something to the level of trauma, assault, or something heinous like that.
Yeah.
That depending on whether or not the relationship is that valuable to you, it may not be worth it. And often what I do is I may not broach the subject with someone because the relationship is not that important to me, but I put them in a different category then.
Right.
I no longer call them friend. They may be an acquaintance then.
They're on the outside ring.
Or I'll hang out with them because they're fun, but they're not somebody that I share my inner thoughts with. My hopes, my dreams, my hurts, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I have to create different boundaries, which we talked about in the last episode. So I think that with forgiveness sometimes comes a change in boundaries or a shift in boundaries, or now to establish some boundaries where there were none before. Many of my conversations with people who've hurt me have been about, well, this was important to me and that's why that hurt. And you violated that. And now you're setting up a new boundary for somebody. Say, oh, okay, if I'm going to be in a relationship with Kim, I know that this is important.
Right.
And so if we're going to continue to be friends, I need to not violate that.
Yeah.
And then they're clear. And if it happens again, I can just say, oh, okay, we talked about this.
Right. And
I'm not doing this again.
And that goes back to your point too, with your situation and the assault. Not that you were to blame by any means, yet how you're able to acknowledge, okay, maybe I can make better choices going forward as far as situations we open ourselves up to. And I think that boundary thing is kind of similar. Someone may say something or do something that offends us or hurts us, and it's not our fault. They chose to say or do those things. And in the same breath, now we have an opportunity and we learn, go, oh, the boundary didn't exist. I need to make one now because I don't want that to happen. So taking responsibility in that aspect, not responsibility for the action of somebody else, but taking responsibility of how can I better protect myself and serve myself. Yes. And what does that look like? I think that's a healthy place to be, where it's not excusing anybody's behavior. It's just saying, oh, I'm going to change because now I know better, so I'm going to do better, and I don't want this.
Yeah, be really clear with yourself about how you move through the world and what that may signal to people. And so I know purely in my situation, that was a case of putting myself in a situation that I could have avoided.
Right.
I could have avoided. And that's not the situation with so many people who have been victimized. But I know that in my case it was.
Yeah.
And
there's
so I changed that.
Yeah. I think that really applies almost universally to when we're talking about friend situations and in those boundaries and stuff, that we absolutely can change the dynamic and set boundaries and change the path. And if they're not willing, then they're just put out to a different circle, different area, or not at all. And we have the freedom to do that. And those are healthy steps we can take to protect ourselves from those painful comments or situations that we don't. Thank you guys for joining us. It's been a good conversation swimming. Look forward to continuing. Please send us any recommendations, topics you want brought up. Our email.
And maybe some questions to think about after today's discussion. Yeah. Are there some things you need to forgive? And whether it's forgiving yourself or forgiving others. And if so, what might that look like? Yeah. Is there any personal work to do around that? And is there a conversation you need to have with someone? Perhaps there's trauma that needs to be processed and worked on. Somebody, and you need to see a professional for that. And like you said earlier, Molly, sometimes we have to get to the point where we acknowledge that there's been a hurt, and Absolutely. Then know who's accountable for that hurt. And sometimes it's not out to carry.
Right.
And that's a huge step when we can step forward and say, no, this isn't mine. This isn't mine.
Being able to forgive ourselves so we can extend forgiveness to others. Because same thing with love. I think we can only love others as much as we are capable ourselves. And willing to love ourselves. And how can I forgive you over here if I can't even forgive myself? So, question, forgiving yourself.
So as always, the choice is yours. You can sit on the edge with your toes in the water or make no significant change in your life. Or you can swim in the deep end with us and take another step closer. Healing and peace, freedom and joy. Thank you very much. Starting with this recording, they will all be posted on Patreon. We hope that you will join us and be a patron with us and enjoy some other benefits as we start to add different tiers and opportunities to swim in the deep end. They will be rolled out in the next couple of months. You can find our beginning sessions on YouTube. And like we said, from time to time, we will be adding other content onto YouTube so that even if you're not a patron of ours and on Patreon, then you can still get some benefit from listening to our YouTube sessions. So thank you very much. Take care of it. Take care of yourselves, and we wish you peace.